You're listening to GRC Explained Right, the show that cuts through the compliance chaos. We don't just talk frameworks, we show you how to take governance, risk, and compliance and turn it into true enterprise resilience and strategic value. Get ready to move beyond the checklist and master the critical concepts with experts from the ISACA Orange County chapter.
Welcome back to GRC Explained Right podcast. My name is Victor Monga. I'm your host and producer of this show. With me, I have Pradeep as my co-host. Today, we are diving into the intersection of healthcare, scale, and trust. Today's guest is Nemi George, our past president of ISACA Orange County chapter, current Chief Information Security Officer at Pacific Dental Services. Now, PDS is not your average or traditional healthcare organization. They support over 900 dental practices across the United States. So let's jump right into it. We're going to discuss what a modern GRC program looks like at the scale, how to get executives to care about boring compliance data. I say boring, but it's important. And how AI is rewriting the rules of the game. Nemi, let's start with this one. When most people picture a CISO protecting a single HQ or that GRC program, you have hundreds of supported practices that you have to support. How does your GRC program look different then, because it's so spread out? The controls are spread out, the feedback is spread out, it's not central at one place. So how does that look like? Is there any different to it?
Well, absolutely. It is different. I think healthcare has its own unique challenges that you have to be aware of. Outside of the challenges and the uniqueness of healthcare, to your other question, Victor, how do you make this relevant? How do you get this up to the board? Compliance for the sake of compliance doesn't really achieve much and doesn't really do anything for anybody. So the first thing you do, or whatever you call your program, whether it's a GRC program, ERM program, a CRQ program, it really doesn't matter. The ultimate differentiator for a successful program is you have to report to the business on the things that they care about. The organization needs to understand and, at a minimum, be able to answer a very basic question. What is our risk? And ultimately, your role as a security leader, how are you helping us navigate through this risk? Are you managing this risk? Are this risk largely unmanaged? But even more importantly than managing risk, do you have a mechanism in place to detect what the risk and exposure is for your organization? And if you don't have that, then you really don't have a program. You may be certified to everything under the sun. You may have all the tooling in the world, but you don't have a GRC program.
Thanks, Nemi. I think that was a good, very good information. So the other question I have is, as you know, like AI is moving faster than most security and compliance programs, right? So from a CISO perspective, where do you see the biggest gaps between like AI innovation and GRC readiness?
Yeah, I think the use of AI is very important in several aspects. I would say maybe no more so than it is with GRC and compliance, right? AI allows us to scale much, much faster than we've been able to do in the past. So I'll give you one very simple example. Today, if security professionals are honest, over 95% of us do a one-time security assessment. You bring in a third-party vendor, you send them a bunch of silly questionnaires that are not tweaked to the service that they're providing you. They're just generic blanket questionnaires. They fill those questionnaires out as part of your contract lifecycle management or vendor onboarding process. And then it ends up in some document repository somewhere, whether it's Box, Dropbox, doesn't matter, OneDrive, and so on. For the most part, nobody looks at those documents ever again till maybe there's a renewal due or maybe there's a breach. Now you bring in AI, for instance. You can do so much with AI. You can get AI tools to go look at all your vendors. You can highlight the vendors that you consider high risk, or you could just do all of it. You could do simple things like crawling through the vendors' public sites, their trust sites, and so on and so forth. If a vendor suddenly, for instance, introduces AI into their product, they're not at liberty or any obligation to tell you or seek your permission first before they introduce AI. Using AI, I can read those agreements, I can read those contracts or whatever it is, and I can notify, speaking as AI, the AI tool can notify you like, hey, vendor A that you already have a contract with has changed their EULAR, they've changed their MSA, they've changed their, whatever it is. And then you can then look at those changes and see if that's relevant to your organization, which may trigger a renegotiation or whatever. Or things like public breaches, for instance. There may be a breach that you're not aware of. AI is able to go out there and pull all that information together. So you're essentially getting, I like to think about it as the credit score. Like you're getting AI to do a credit assessment of your vendors. So at every point in time, you have a FICO score, you have a risk score of the vendors that you consider most critical to your business operation, rather than just hoping that a document you signed 3 years ago with a vendor committed to, I'm going to patch critical vulnerabilities every 7 days. And then 3 years later, you just cross your fingers and hope they're still patching critical vulnerabilities every 7 days. You have no idea.
Let me ask you this, Nemi. You brought up a good point about correlating that FICO score to having a better assessment using AI. But let me ask you this, the efficacy. So as the AI threats will increase, would you think the AI poisoning will factor in when you see that score and you have to ask yourself as a security leader, do I trust this score? So let's say I started a SaaS company and I'm trying to serve you and my score is really bad because I didn't pay attention to my traditional SEO style and everything. And AI just gave you a bad score of Victor SaaS. What would be the efficacy of it? How would you still consider me or evaluate me? What factor of that score you just mentioned will play in your decision factor or decision matrix, if you will?
That's a great question. First things first, you don't take anything as face value. AIs all have models. It depends on what those models are. You certainly want depth and richness in the data being collected. Now, I'll be nice and I'm not going to mention names of vendors, but we've had vendors that for the last 10 plus years that make, security assumptions and attribute level of security maturity to organizations based largely on breadcrumbs, right? Digital asset trails that they're able to pick up on the internet or looking at, things as, as basic as credentials on the dark web. And based on very little information, they come up with, statements of the perceived risk of a particular company. So to your question, no one should be making contractual decisions solely based on some type of score or maturity rating of a vendor. So the flip to it is with a lot of the AI tools, they're a little bit different from the legacy security rating tools. They go into a lot more detail than these previous tools do. But everyone using any type of agentic AI or third-party risk management, CRQ type tools, you've got to do your own research. You've got to find out how are they making these decisions? What are the trigger points? The other thing that you need to do is every one of these tools ascribes a certain weight to their findings. So for instance, if you have not patched a critical vulnerability, does that give, say, 5 points? Does that take away 5 points from the overall rating versus if you're using, say, unsupported TLS 1.1, whatever the case is. So you get to choose. You don't have to take the ratings that the vendors provide out of the box. You get to look at, what makes sense. And then the final thing, which security professionals sometimes forget about, is context. I'll use an example, right? If I'm hiring a company to come clean my windows or take out the trash or whatever, do I really care that they haven't got the best firewall in the world and this, that, and the other? And so when you look at the ratings that you get, you really have to come back to your organization and say, what is the exposure? What is the service I am getting from this vendor? And do I really care? Does this really apply? And in some cases, maybe it doesn't. So you've got to take all of those things into account before making a decision on whether to proceed with the vendor or not.
But you brought up a good point here where the rubric has always been there, right? All of the analysts, they follow a rubric that, okay, if you do certain things certain ways, I'm going to give you certain scores. That's always been there. But now we're taking away the subjective evaluation part of it away, because with AI, it's a machine. Either you have it or you don't. I'll give you a very simple example. When I travel to India, the weight of the luggage for the check-in is 22 kilos. And if I have 23, 24, the check-in counter will let me go. Now they have automated machines where you put your luggage. If it's 22 or below, you get your tag. If not, then it doesn't. So it took away that subjective way of rubric.
Yeah.
It's the same way with AI now. It's going to take away that subjective way of like, oh yeah, we're still getting there. Or yeah, I have it. We're just baking that. I'm not going to give you a score. AI is not going to give you scores. My question back to the efficacy, I think it will weight higher than what it used to be because now the subjectivity is washed away. Either you have it or you don't. And that's the score machine is going to give you.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And also, Nemi, I have a further question. I think you mentioned about like agentic AI and also like how credentials are being breached on the dark web, or the other side where the hackers are trying to get those or probably use those agentic AIs, right? So as a lot of leaders like worry about putting too much governance around AI, right? Because I think when they put too much governance around AI, I think that will slow down the business actually. And as a CISO, like how do you personally balance then, like enabling this AI innovation while still protecting the organizations?
I think there are two ways to answer that. The first thing is what I've always said to security professionals. We're not necessarily the smartest people in the room, and it's about time that we acknowledge that. And even when we are about the smartest people in the room, we're certainly not the most exposed to the entire business and what the business needs or what the business wants. And so we need to handle our role whenever I hear governance, like that with a heightened sense of responsibility. We have to go in knowing that we need to understand. We need to have a working level in some cases, not always practical, but we need to have a working level of what we want to govern before we throw around the governance, compliance, standards and all of those sort of things. So that's the first thing that I would say. Now, once you have an understanding of why your organization is using AI, whatever type of AI, machine learning, deep learning, full AI, agentic AI, doesn't really matter. Once you understand the context and the business benefits, and then you understand the exposure, for example, are they looking to put in sensitive data? Do you work in healthcare? Are they looking to expose patient data to AI models? Are these AI models public, sourced or open source AI, or these models or these services that are proprietary, on-prem, closed tenants, single tenant industry type tenants? You've got to understand all of those things. Then you start looking at what are my key risk areas. And I'll unpack that just a little bit. Rather than say, I'm going to govern the entire spectrum of AI use, focus on what your critical assets are and what your key risk areas are. Now, I'll use for simplicity, let's say your organization, let's say you work in finance. You're fine with all these other things being put into AI, but you're not fine with your internal financials or your client financial statements going into AI. Once you understand that, you're able to put guardrails around the specifics, and you will find that you may, in this one example, you could use existing technologies like DLP and other things to form the AI governance layer that you need. But I think a lot of times we jump straight into restricting, and restricting does not mean governance. Because when you restrict people just because you think that's your job, you're simply creating other avenues for them to go around and do what they want to do.
Yeah, I kind of like the approach you mentioned, News, because from the agentic AI or like even the natural language NLP, right? So lot of this, what I see is like, hey, like you are having so much zero trust on this, but then again, like you also want to build that trust on the intelligence, right? Like building those intelligence trust is like very, very helpful. So I think thanks for that.
All right, Nemi, we're going to play a game. We're going to end this episode with a quick fire round. Don't overthink it. Just give me the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
Fire away.
Yeah.
Does compliance drive security, or does security drive compliance?
Security should drive compliance. But if you need to fund your security program, you can use compliance, because most boards understand compliance better than they understand security. So you could use compliance to drive a security program. But
a good answer.
Security must be the driving force, not compliance.
All right. What is the biggest lie vendors tell CISO about GRC automation? Whatever comes to your mind.
Automate everything, and they have integrations to every integration is an API away, and then you end up 6 months down the line trying to make it work.
All right. What is the one spreadsheet you wish you could delete forever?
Reviewing access controls via spreadsheet. And yeah, very painful.
If you could wave a magic wand and rewrite one section of HIPAA that could help your organization or like your organization, what would you change? Just one thing.
The crazy focus on encryption would be the one thing I would change. I think encryption is absolutely necessary, but a lot of healthcare systems are legacy, and some of them out of the gate don't do very well.
Sure.
And I would certainly change that and make that a little bit more adaptive based on the need.
Right. And modern technologies, right? So whatever it was written to where we are today, the lot of technologies,
Absolutely.
compensating controls, like that needs to factor. That's a good one, actually. So, all right. This is going to give you a chuckle. What's harder to secure, 1,000 servers or 1,000 dentists?
1,000 dentists.
One last question now, Nemi. So, I think maybe you were also mentioning about encryption, and also the question I have is like, if you had like one piece of advice to CISOs, right? So like just starting their AI GRC governance, like what would be that probably like you tell them, hey, like focus on this first, and what can you weigh? So like how do you give advice to other fellow CISOs on this AI GRC journey?
Great question. Something I talk about in different ways. When we talk about GRC, and I'm going to make some assumptions here, because a lot of times when we talk about GRC, we're talking about third parties, we're talking about risk, we're talking about TPRM and internal first party controls as well. But I think a lot of times GRC controls end up being more focused on a corporate administrative level, right? And I'll focus on one aspect of GRC, which is one of my personal pet peeves, TPRM. I have done many TPRM programs. I have reviewed hundreds of them. And in a lot of cases, you read through the TPRM program and the focus is on the company, meaning the entity, the organization. Do they have policies? Do you have a named CISO? Do you have an incident response plan? Do you have cyber insurance? What's your indemnification coverage, liability coverage, all of those sort of things. And that's somewhat useful. You've got to know who you're dealing with, right? Know your client, know your customer, all of that good stuff. But I would like to see, especially in the age of AI, I would love to see more focus on GRC towards the operational level, the integration level, how the systems communicate with each other. I tell my team this. If you present me a third-party risk assessment, and as part of your documentation, you don't have an architectural diagram, you don't have a data flow diagram, you don't have the connective tissue of how both systems are stitched together, so I can see where the soft underbelly is and where those sort of weakness points are, that you haven't done your work. And the amount of times that people give you a third-party review, or you're looking at a GRC program, you're looking at a risk register, it's very administrative. It's very top-of-shelf things, and you don't really have any handle on the underlying connective tissues of both organizations or your internal processes. That should be the focus of using AI to accelerate that. Controls testing, measurement of effectiveness, making sure you understand where you're soft and how you can shore up those controls.
That's awesome.
Very good, very fair.
Yeah, because now I see a lot of people, they're actually building this AI governance across, and I think these takeaways is really helpful because you kind of mentioned, narrow down to operationalize how to build that strategic, like that probably it could be in developing the architecture or even understanding the business impact itself while building AI GRC governance. Yeah, thanks, Nemi. That was awesome.
No worries. You're welcome.
All right, Nemi, thanks so much for being on the show, and I hope to see you soon again.
No worries.
Thanks for listening out there. Thank you, and stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you very much.
That wraps up another episode of GRC Explained Right. Don't keep your expertise a secret. Reach out to us today to be a featured expert. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you next time.